morning, everybody. If you were here, I'd offer you a coffee and some toast for breakfast. That's the spot. This video is about making this French loaf using Julia Child's method, mostly. You'll see towards the end that I do vary a bit towards the end on the thing. Out of Julia's The Art of French Cooking, Volume 2. And I just checked the original publication date on that is 1970, so nothing new. I'm sure, I think I said later on in the video here, you can probably pick up a copy at your local library. I know you can buy used copies for not very much money at all on Amazon, and I believe it's still in print. You can still buy new copies. But it makes an excellent loaf. I'm having mine toasted this morning with butter and, of course, some of my black currant jam. It is very good. The process that you do with no-knead bread produces a good loaf. But this is more, I would say, authentic. It has an excellent flavor. And that comes from all of the long fermentation. It's a recipe, as you'll see as we go on here, that takes a bit of time, but really you're not doing all that much work. Basically it's got 3 fermentations in it. They're 2 to 3 hours each one, so you just walk away and leave it. It's not that it's all that labor intensive or anything. Anyway, let's have a look at the video and how the loaf was produced, and I hope you'll give it a try. You've just seen what I'm going to make is a simple, plain French loaf called un pain de campagne, a country loaf. This same mix that I'm doing will make several different, you can use it to make a baguette or several different kinds of French bread. It's just a basic French bread recipe, and it is out of the Mastering the Art of French Cooking by good old Julia Child, Volume 2. I can't put a link down below because, as I say, it's out of this cookbook of Julia's written many years ago. This is a paperback version, and I guess the recipe that I'm doing starts on page 90, if that's any help to you. But you can get this book, I'm sure, at your local library, and still available in bookstores. We'll start, the instructions that Julia gives throughout the recipe are for hand kneading it. But at the end of the recipe she explains that you can also use a stand mixer. So I am going to be using the stand mixer. Take the easy way out. That was 1 pound. Julia does use weights most of the time, but not metric. So that was 1 pound of bread flour. She says, again, a strong bread flour. Mine is the only bread flour that I can get around here, Robin Hood. It's a popular brand. And to that, it's 2 1/4 teaspoons of salt, and 1/4 ounce of yeast. And I'm using the instant yeast, which I don't think even existed when Julia wrote the book. It's now used by almost every professional bakery and baker. Julia talks about proofing the yeast, even the dry yeast, and that would be necessary if it wasn't for the fact that I'm using the instant one. So that's 1/4 ounce of instant yeast. I'll just mix that together a little bit before I add the water. Okay, the water that I'm adding is tepid. It's about 74 degrees. I tested that with my instant read thermometer because Julia says to use a tepid water. She says half pint, which is strange, half pint's a cup. But she also used 4 tablespoons to prove the yeast in. So I'm using a half cup plus 4 tablespoons of tap water. And her instructions for using a stand mixer is not to get it up so that it's going too fast, only up to say 3 or 4 on the scale here. So and it should go for roughly 10 minutes. I think that's about on 3. I'll let it go for 10 minutes, but I'll bring you back halfway through that just to show you what's happening inside the mixer. Now, if you can hear me, this is about halfway through the kneading process. A little over halfway through, I guess. And as you can see, it's come together quite nicely. I reduced the speed down to 2. I was using 3 on this stand mixer of mine, but I put it down to 2. You don't want to over-knead, according to Julia anyway, so it'll knead for another 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll bring you back and show you the next step. Finished its kneading. It's out of the stand mixer, if not out of the bowl anyway. I've got a fly here that's driving me crazy. Get this covered over as soon as possible. I'm just shaping it into a sort of a ball. Doesn't need any flour or anything on the pastry board. It's a nice texture. Now this goes in an ungreased, I'm using a glass bowl, any bowl I guess. Julia says the steeper the sides the better, so I don't know. That's what I have to use, whether that's right or not I couldn't tell you. I'm just taking a temperature inside here to illustrate something. That is 82 degrees and the room temperature here is about 70. So the kneading process rises the temperature of the dough quite a bit above room temperature. Now I'm covering it with plastic wrap. And Julia specifies that it should be on a wooden surface, which this happens to be on. She says that marble or granite or anything like that is too cold, so it's on a wooden surface. If you were using a marble or granite surface, put a towel under it, a bath towel, and she says to put a folded bath towel over the top of this. And the reason for that is what I just showed you. The internal temperature of the dough right now is 82 degrees. So it's got its own heat, and this is like acting like an insulator to keep that heat in there for the rising process. Now it will rise for at least 3 hours, up to 5 hours, depending on your room temperature. My room temperature is just about what she called for, 70 degrees, so I think 3 hours will do. But it is supposed to rise until it is 3.5 times increased its volume. So I'll bring you back in about 3 hours' time. Well, it has been 4 hours, I guess. I let it go for 4 hours. And now it starts its second rising. As soon as I get it out of here anyway, get it deflated. Just a little bit of flour to prevent it from sticking. Talks about bubbles. There's a big bubble there. Now Julia says to flatten it out gently, not bashing it around too much, but and to pinch any of the big bubbles that you see. So one there and one over there. Now it gets hopefully that has redistributed the yeast. And it goes back in the bowl for a second rising. Doesn't have to go full. There's another bubble there that I didn't get. It doesn't have to go full 3.5 times. As long as it doubles in bulk or so, this time is good enough. So that will probably be 1.5 to 2 hours anyway. Snuggled up under its bath towel. So I'll bring you back at that time. It's been 1.5 hours. The dough has risen again. I would say to at least double what it is when it's completely deflated. And now you shape the loaf for its final rising before it goes in the oven. A little flour on the board. That rests for 5 minutes. Well, as I've said, it can be shaped into many different kinds of loaves, including a baguette. I've chosen to do a simple round country loaf, so it could be sliced in slices large enough for toast or sandwiches or whatever. And the folding instructions here that I'm about to do are Julia Child's. I've never done this before, but you bring this side over almost to the edge. And you bring this side back again, almost to the edge, and you do a quarter turn. And you keep doing that. And what you in theory are doing is increasing the surface tension, so that you end up with a loaf that will hold its shape. As I said before, I have never done this before, so whether mine will hold its shape or not, I don't know. And I've lost track of how many times I've turned here, but she says 10 to 12 times. I'll give you enough surface tension, I guess. Still squishing out a lot of those bubbles. A little bench flour here, I think. Okay. Now, doing this should bring all of those seams together at the bottom. In theory, it will hold its shape. Rub a lot of flour into, she says, a canvas. Well, I don't have a canvas. I'm using a linen tea towel, I guess. The idea being this will prevent the dough as it rises from sticking too badly to the cloth. Now you put this on upside down and pinch together the bottom bits here, just to make sure that it's sealed. And dust that on the top with a little flour. So So the top cloth won't stick to the dough. And now once again it rises for an hour and a half or so until it's, well, it says triple in size. Well, more than double in size anyway. I'll bring you back at that time. Well, it's been 2 hours since I put it on the floured tea towel here. I have slid the tea towel over on top of a baking sheet and brought it over to the stove to make it easier to get it in the oven. This is the point where I'm going to vary from Julia Child's instructions. She talks about some of the older methods of turning your conventional oven sort of into a commercial baker's steam injected oven. The method that she says to use is to put a shallow tray of water, roasting pan or whatever, in the bottom of the oven, and then superheat something, a brick or rock or some piece of iron or whatever, handling that very carefully and putting that in the water after you have put the loaf either on a cookie sheet or a baking stone or whatever. I'm not going to do that. When Julia wrote the book, Mr. Leahy in New York had not come up with his method for making the no-knead bread and cooking it inside of a cast iron cooking pot. And that's what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to slash it as she recommends, and I'm going to put it inside of the old cast iron pot that I have here that I've used for many years to make the no-knead bread, and put the lid on. I'll bake it for half hour at 450 with the lid on, and then I'll take the lid off for whatever it takes to brown the top of the loaf nicely. Usually that's about 10 minutes or so. For this size of a loaf, Julia, and the shape of the loaf, Julia recommends a cross slash. This thing is called a lame. It's just a razor blade, but this is one that the bakers use. One slash across the top. And then to complete the cross, it's 2 slashes sideways like that. Now to get it in the oven and in the pot as quickly as possible. Work fast here. The cast iron pot has been preheated in the 450 degree oven for at least half an hour. Mine's been in there well over an hour. I'm just going to throw the loaf down in. Put the old cover back on it. Start my timer for 30 minutes. Well, it's had its first 30 minutes with the cover on. Ta-da! Nice shape. It's already quite a good brown. And I'll let it go for at least another 10 minutes. Well, there it is. Now comes the hard part. Wait at least 3 hours before you can cut it. And for me, that's going to be tomorrow morning. It's now just gone after 11 p.m. I don't know, I think it looks fairly good. There's a nice hollow sound to it, which I guess is a good indication that it's cooked through and through. But a loaf of bread just out of the oven like that is still cooking, and that's why you don't cut one until it is thoroughly cooled. The cooking process continues until the loaf is cool. So I will slice this open for you in the morning when it has cooled down. Well, good morning, everybody. It is now rested overnight and is truly cool. Let's see what it looks like inside. Well, it's not bad. It's a pretty good structure. All of the slow fermentation and the 3 rises over a long period of time, that's what produces the flavor and also this nice what bakers call a crumb. A pretty good structure of holes, not enormous holes, but a pretty good structure of bubbles and holes inside. That's what makes for a really good French loaf. And as I said earlier, I guess this loaf could be shaped into many. It's the same bread basic recipe that's used for many of the French white bread, all the way from dinner rolls to baguettes, that sort of thing. There's a lot of time involved in doing this, more than time than in doing the no knead bread, that's for sure. But the time, really, I mean, you're not doing that much work. It's just the same with the no knead bread. You're just going away and leaving it for 2 or 3 hours and coming back to it. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you'll give this a try.